Hello. What I'm going to do now, or today, I guess, is kind of just a little short video on how I reference other tracks to kind of shape my own sound, shape my own track, the spectral balance, overall volume level, things like that to kind of tweak it to sound a little more professional, get it in, kind of shape of the professional track that I'm replicating. In this case, I have three that I'm using to kind of dictate how I want to sound. Obviously, the same style. I'll play the original track first, and then from there, we'll kind of break it down, kind of look at the breakdown of what I look at based on what I use Pro MB to break it into four, basically frequency ranges to kind of dictate how loud it needs to be, how wide it needs to be, what instruments fit in that specific range more than others, and things like that. So I'll just play the track and then we'll jump into it.
I know you're telling me you're leaving, but all I wanna do is hold you now and hear the sound of your heart beating. If there's a way to stop this, show me how. Give me your loving, give me your loving, just give me your loving, give it to me, baby. Give me your loving, just give me your loving, yeah, give me your loving, give it to me, baby. Oh, oh, give it to me, baby. Oh, oh, give it to me, baby. You do this, I don't know if I'm ever gonna be the same, or what there's gotta be more to this. Just tell me that I'll hold you in my arms again. I know you're telling me you're leaving, but all I wanna do is hold you now and hear the sound of your heart beating. If there's a way to stop this, show me how.
Perfect. All right, so that's the gist of it. It's not 100% done. I basically already ran it through references I want to use, but I'm doing it a second time because basically the first time I matched it up close enough where I was reaching the levels I wanted, getting as loud as I wanted to. I had the balance I wanted, matching the reference tracks, but then, of course, I went back in and did a couple little tweaks. I also have the project file itself open in case I need to go in here and dictate, change something. Maybe some of the chords are too loud, maybe something's standing out that I don't want to, that I can't fix just looking at the master wave. So that's why I have this open, so then I can kind of jump back and forth. But I don't really need to do that right now. So if we look at this, we kind of already know how loud it is, but what I want to look at first is basically the chorus. That's kind of what I'm dictating everything on right now. The rest of it I can kind of balance based off of the chorus, but since that's the loudest part, the most energetic, high energy section of the song, obviously, that's basically all I'm using to reference off of. So I have these 3 other tracks that I'm using, and what I do is obviously I use Insight to compare it to how loud my song is, but I also use Pro and B, and I guess you could use any EQ or multiband to look at this. I have it broken down into the exact same categories I have in the original project. The reason I do this is sometimes normally I don't bring the wave in of the song. Normally I just have a separate session open with only the references, and then I'll compare it directly to the actual, which I don't know if you'll be able to hear this. It's just a little bit of low end from the vocoder. But normally I'll just A/B it from this separate project into the actual project session. So I don't render out a 24-bit wave. I would just do it from within here and A/B it, and then either tweak this or tweak the master or tweak individual sounds in the mix to match it. But in this case, I'm doing it here because this thing will not play. It is a surprisingly big project. It doesn't look like it because I kind of double and triple stack everything, as you can see by my automation and things underneath it, but oh well. So what I'll do first, I generally, the low end is very important on electronic music. So what I'll do is obviously reference that the most, so I can kind of get my low end to match what a quote professional song should be, LUFS levels wise, peak wise. For the most part, I kind of have an almost preset in Pro MB down, which is basically this. This was tweaked, obviously, to kind of match exactly what I wanted, but I always have my threshold at -11 dB for my sub, and my range, normally I have it at -4, but my sub in this song wasn't pushing as hard, so I raised it a little bit to be a little more lenient than normal. Mostly attack and release is what's affected. In this case, I didn't want the kick transient cutting through as much as I normally do, and the release is really tight so that there's not a lot of separation between the kick and the sub. I mean, it can change depending on how I want it to sound, but in this case, I wanted it to be really tight, especially since my lowest sub note goes down to a low C sharp, which is obviously kind of a pain to work with in electronic music that's really low. So I had to do some finagling in the mix, and then on here to kind of get it to match up. So let's listen to the sub and go from there. So this is Your Love. I believe this is Misha K. So I'll reference this real quick. We'll A/B it to this. And actually, first thing we'll do is solo the chorus. I don't want it from when it initially kicks in. Here. I don't really consider that the chorus. We're going to do from 34 and then the 16 bars after that. That's kind of how I'll dictate it. So more high energy because you have the horns come in and then the vocals after 8 bars. So let's listen to this and then compare and then this one, and then we'll kind of look at the levels we see. So I'm soloing this band, so I only hear basically below 110 hertz, but with this slope. It's a little bit of an aggressive slope. You can go up to 48 decibels per octave, but at that point, you're creating so much of a separation, it doesn't sound natural. And then there's obviously a sharp change. What if you have a bass note that jumps an octave, half an octave, and it leaves this low, below 110 hertz section, jumps up here, then it's compressed differently. That's not something I'd want to deal with. So I leave a little bit of a crossover for the low end, and then it gets progressively wider in the mid-range, and then tightens up a bit in the top again, just because I push transients up here. So we'll do this. We'll listen to this. And this is all sub for you, so if you're not listening on headphones, or if you're listening on like a fucking phone speaker, it's probably going to sound like shit. So that's good enough for me. I get the 16 bars. I kind of know where I'm sitting. So negative, what I'm looking at is integrated. You could do short term, I guess, but short term is still too much of a variation for 16 bars. So integrated is basically showing me the LUFS, LUFS, over the period of these 16 bars, and it shows me the average loudness is negative 11.1 LUFS. That's about on average where I would have expected it to be. Normally I see between negative 12 to negative 10. So let's see what we see for feel it, and I'll reset that. So we see that one was louder, negative 10. So it's about a decibel louder in accordance to the LUFS scale that I'm using. Not a big deal. I can be a little bit above, a little bit below that. It's not going to make or break a song, unless the rest of the mix is horrible, obviously. And then last, both of these, by the way, I believe these are both Matt Nash songs. So we'll check out Run. So that one obviously doesn't fit the 17 bars. It's a little bit slower, but we see it sitting at negative 11 LUFS also. Cool. And then we'll compare it to the original. Now, this is kind of where you're going to be looking at saying, all right, based on this, should I go back into the mix? Do I need to make my kick low and louder or quieter? Or maybe the sub bass is too loud, too quiet? Do I need to make it tighter, which would help raise, obviously, the overall level a little bit? Do I need to maybe loosen the side chain? That would make it a little bit quieter for those brief periods. That will add up. So there's a lot more that goes into it than just raising and lowering, gain staging the sounds. You can change it from side chaining, from the stereo width, things like that will help kind of change the average LUFS of the sound also. So this is what it is in my track so far. And I'm happy with it. Basically the same as the Your Love one, which is surprising because my bass line's a lot more sparse than that. Also, the notes are a lot more varied. And like I said, at some points I have a low C sharp and then counteracting it to get some less feel, more sound with a high C sharp above it. So I'm doubling it. But yeah, that's about where I wanted it to be. I'm also looking at the stereo field, by the way. Like I said at the beginning, that's something that I want to match somewhat close with also. The sub doesn't matter as much to me. I don't put anything 100% mono. I don't think that's a smart thing to do because it's not realistic. It's not something you ever see in professional tracks, as you can see here. Obviously, the sub bassline synth is mono, but I wouldn't never go on my master and make everything below 90 or 100 or 110 hertz mono. That's just me. But obviously, it's going to vary from person to person or even style. So next section I look at, and obviously I've already looked at it full spectrum. Like this, I already know how the levels match up. I don't really look at that until after I've done this anyway. So we'll go to the next batch, which is going to be basically 110 to 1100, 1200 hertz. So we'll look at this in the original. integrated LUFS and the stereo field and kind of see, hey, is this wide enough, loud enough? Can it be louder, wider? Listening for individual sounds. Maybe the hats are too wide in my song specifically, or they don't cut through the mix enough, or the vocal low end, basically where the vocal sits, isn't loud enough or is too quiet. And those are kind of things I'll listen to here. So we'll listen to the original and then go down the line in this case. Cool, so basically 12 and a half LUFS, a little bit less than that. And there was a lot of movement in the stereo field. I could hear it, I could see it. Nothing stood out where I needed to move it, but obviously I might be wrong, so that's why we have references. So start with Your Love. So that one was a little bit quieter, as we can see, like 0.7 decibels quieter, I would say, if I had to guesstimate. I don't want to do the math in my head, but I'm going to guess. And the stereo field at points were wider. The fills were a lot wider, so those fills are really wide. That's something I could change in mine, which I might, but it wasn't big enough of a difference where I feel like I need to make a change, at least not from one reference. So we'll go to the next one, reset this, and check it out. So that one's slightly louder than mine. It's really negligible. And looking at the stereo field, we could see it was a little bit more narrow than the previous one. Maybe when the kick drum dropped out, it was wider, obviously, because there wasn't anything straight down the middle anymore to counteract the width of, that lead. But yeah, that one was about the same as mine, so that's kind of a good sign for me. And then we'll look at the last one. Wow, okay, so that one is really wide. Quieter again by about half, a little more than half a decibel, not a big deal. For me, at least, half a decibel, for me being too high or too low, I'll either compensate in a different section of the stereo field, maybe the mid-highs, high-mids, or the sub, to counteract that, to keep the same overall LUFS. So what I noticed, though, is the two quieter ones were a lot wider. Obviously, that makes sense. They can kind of spread the field out a little bit, but at the cost of volume. It doesn't really matter to me. So nothing that I saw really makes me need to change this, which makes sense since I've already ran through it once and made the tweaks in this original project file. So next section, we'll look at the original again. Look at the width. This should be wider than it was down here. Basically, the higher up the stereo field you can get, the wider you can get. And I'm sure once we get to the very top end above 10K, basically, we'll see the correlation sitting a lot closer to 0 than plus 1. Basically, +1 is perfectly in phase, almost, well, that's mono, basically. And then -1 would be the complete opposite. Realistically, you're never going to have a song like this, because if you did and you collapse it to mono, well, you're not really listening to anything at that point. So, let's check this out. So 11.5, nice whole number. We saw how wide this was. It was wider than the range I chose below it. That makes sense, not a surprise to me. Nothing stood out audibly. I guess maybe I could have made some things wider. Maybe I will still, I don't know, like the lead sound, but not make or break, I don't think, unless one of these three, or more than one, I should say, dictates it. Just because one of them shows an anomaly compared to mine doesn't mean I'm going to change it because of that. That's why you use multiple references. You have to take into account, tempo, a slight tempo change, a different key you need to take into account, things like that. Obviously, the sound design used. Are you intentionally going for something that's, maybe cut back on the subs to overemphasize the mids or the highs, like in pop? Or are you going for like a deep underground thing where it can be less hyper compressed and then just sub is just a wall of noise? You got to take all those into account when picking reference tracks. And I picked 3 that I would say are similar styles. Maybe one of them I think is a little more upbeat, energetic. One of them is a lot less, and one of them I think is about the same level. So that's just how I chose this. It doesn't really matter, as long as it somewhat sonically matches the style. So 11.5 LUFS, we'll see what this one is. So mine is about 1.5 decibels louder in this section, LUFS. This one was wide. That had nice width to it. I really liked how that sounded. If I go back to mine, compared to this, mine's louder, but not as wide, so that's something I would probably take into consideration, and that's probably something I will go back and fix, where I can kind of push the loudness in this mid to high range section of the song, give it more stereo field, kind of see how it sounds at least. I don't want it to thin it out too much, which it might, but if it helps, I like the sound of wideness, of a lot of width. So fuck it, we'll see. Next, boom. So another one, good width, good level. Mine was a little bit louder, but not make or break. I don't care. I can either cut mine down or widen it. I might do both, drop the overall level by half a decibel, but then push it a little bit wider to kind of compensate for that. But yeah, that one was really wide. I liked that, but a little bit quieter. Liked how all the sounds fit in this one. So maybe do something like that. I don't know. So I can take that into account, kind of see where I fit. And then the last one. Wow, all right, that one was really wide, wow, yeah, that was, that was a wide song. That one was a lot quieter than mine, 3 decibels, LUFS lower. Wow, yep, all right. So that one certainly was an anomaly compared to these two. These two were somewhat close. This one was a big difference. I can't say that's gonna make me lower my overall level in this section of my spectrum, but I'm certainly gonna look at it. Maybe I'll test it out a decibel or 2 lower to get a little bit closer in line the averages of these. But if I don't like how it sounds, I'll just go back to what I want, to how I have it here. These are references, these aren't necessarily, hey, I need to make the change, but they're, hey, compared to a professional sound, a professional mixed and mastered track, how do I sound? This one kind of makes mine look like a brick wall, which it is, I guess. But we'll see. So we'll do that. We'll do the super top end treble area, kind of see how this sounds. I'm expecting all of these to be pretty damn wide, and the overall LUFS to be quieter, and then go from there. Cool, so basically -24, I'll say, and the width was good. It probably could have been wider, could have been sitting a little bit closer to that 0 correlation. So my track is certainly, I'm sacrificing some stereo width so I can push more up the middle to kind of boost the loudness easier and quicker. So in my mind already, without listening to these 3, I'm already thinking of little ways I can tweak this, basically to spread the top of the stereo field, spread the lead, maybe the vocal FX, maybe the mid to top end of the bass line to add width at the cost of some loudness, which I can certainly sacrifice. This is a really loud track, so let's look at the next track and kind of base it off of what we see. Cool. So I saw that one was louder and a lot wider. I believe it was louder, but it was certainly wider. Yeah, there's a lot of width on that one. And then if I go back to mine, so that one at its peak is about 2 LUFS higher. I know sometimes I say 2 decibels. I should be saying 2 LUFS. I guess I'm using them interchangeably, but don't do that. That's a verbal miscue on my part. Oh well, you are probably smarter than me, so you should know that. Next one. But yeah, so I can see I probably need to make my top end wider. Just listening to that and looking at that reference, I could tell I wasn't exactly where I needed to be. But I can tweak that. Like I said, if I lower this and boost this, maybe I'll end up basically at the same overall level. We'll see. So same thing with that one, about one LUFS louder in the integrated category and very wide, sitting either at or even a little bit below zero correlation, which is crazy wide. So given that 2 out of the 3 are already showing up wider than mine, that kind of shows me, hey, I can push this a little bit more. And even listening, I can tell I can get more loudness from compressing the highs a little bit more. I was emphasizing transients to cut through, but now I know I can cut those back slightly, maybe 3-5%, boost the release so that it lasts longer to give more of a sustained top end. That'll help with the level and the wideness a bit, while on top of already adding a little more width to the top of the stereo field. So I'm going to check that out after this one, but I'm going to assume, given how this one's been wider than mine, basically in literally every single band I have set up, it's going to be wider up here too. Yep, so as expected, louder. I actually did not expect that, by about 1.5 LUFS, and wider by a lot. So yeah, looking at that kind of shows me what I need to do to work on this. I can basically, once I go into the original project file, if I went back here, I know this section is basically too loud. I could just drop it here a little bit, either the gain or the range. I'd probably do the range so that it starts compressing it once it reaches, I guess I'd do threshold instead of -10, maybe drop it to -10.5 or 11, see how that sounds. And then I can boost my top end a little bit. I'll probably do that within the mix. I'm not going to just, raise this. I'll probably do it on specific sounds that I want to be emphasized a little bit. But that gives me something to look at in the mix of my song. Breaking it down 3 reference tracks into 3, 4, 5, 6, however many bands you want. And then looking at, the loudness unit full scale, LUFS, and then obviously a spectrogram to see how wide it is. The individual sounds within the stereo field, how wide they are, how transienty they are, how much do they stand out compared to the other songs or sounds in that specific part of the mix, things like that. And these are all things I look at when I reference. So that's really the only way I reference is what I just showed you. And I think it helps. I think I've done a decent job with it. So yeah, it gives you something to kind of hopefully help you out when you get into referencing once your song's basically 95, 96, whatever % done, and you're at the end stretch, trying to push a little bit more loudness out, get the mix a little bit more clear, balanced, polished, quote, professional sounding. Yeah, hopefully that helps someone. And that's the end of that. Nothing too crazy, I guess, but hopefully it helps someone out there. So that's it for now. Hopefully you learned something, or at least found a little tip or trick you can use to test out on your references. And you have a great rest of your day.